Okay, thanks so much, Alex and Milena and Lizette for having me here. I really appreciate this opportunity to speak with all of you. My background actually might surprise you. I actually have my studies in college were in art and a minor in food science, but I've always found myself working in the area of food entrepreneurship. And so I'm a really creative science and food person. So I think of food as my art, really. So this is going to be food science startup essentials for food entrepreneurs. You can go ahead and put next slide. So just a quick overview. There's 5 main areas I'll talk about today. One is ideation. Next is figuring out your food category, understanding formulation, which is your recipe, and then food safety, how you have to keep your food safe as a food manufacturer, and lastly, some lab testing and shelf life information. Next slide. Let's talk about ideation first. So you may have all been in a conversation with friends and family, and talked about all of your big ideas. And I really want you to get a little notebook that you write those ideas in, because sometimes our best ideas are forgotten. I mean, you just keep track of those great ideas. But in this case, the reason I bring it up is because when you figure out what type of food you want to create to sell, it's always good to spend some very serious time thinking about that food and focus on a few different things. So you want to focus on the ingredients, because if you can, it's always great to find local and regional ingredients to include in your food, especially if you're going to end up trying to get into a farmer's market. You may have to show the farmer's market manager that you are using local food ingredients. You also want to look at the trends. What are the things that people are talking about? What have you seen in the news? What have you noticed when you've gone out to eat and enjoyed a meal with friends and family? What are some of the things that you see out in your world that could impact the type of food product that you're going to develop? I always tell people, go look when you're looking at your packaging, go look, for instance, in the perfume category at the like at Macy's or something. Check out what their packaging colors are, see how they're designing things, and see if you can make your package kind of look cool, like somebody wants to have it with them. One category that I always think is pretty innovative is the beverage category. Even though you're not in the beverage category, you might just go look at some of the designs and colors that are coming out on some of those canned beverages that people carry around with them. We're also looking for a gap for your product to fill, and that's what a niche is. Can you fill some kind of a need in consumers' kitchen or their daily activities? That would be a great thing to know about your product. And then make sure you're exploring the competitors' products offering. So when you go into your local market, maybe go into 2 or 3 markets and look in the category that you're going to work in and see what the competitor is doing. What is the serving size? What is the pack size? What is the shelf space that's available for that product? And then lastly, you really should try and make that product that you've been thinking about. In most cases, the best products to start with are the ones that we already know how to make, maybe a grandma recipe or something special that your family has been making for years, because you really have a good story about it. Next slide. Food category. You do need to understand the category that you want to sell into. You need to understand what process your food is going to go through to be manufactured in a safe manner. You need to understand the types of packaging that are used in your category, the standard serving size, and the shelf life. So you can go buy a few products that people are selling in the category that you're interested in and learn a lot of information from those products. And I really suggest that you do that. Next slide. First, I'll talk about canned foods. These are 3 different types of food. The 2 on the top, one is strawberry jam and the other is barbecue sauce. Those are both called acidified food because we're taking non-acid food and adding acid to them. And then we're doing a thermal process or cooking them and putting them into a container with a lid. And we're creating a seal with pasteurization. And we get a shelf-stable food product that's refrigerated after opening. Most of you, or many of you, if you have a sauce like this, will be using acidified foods process. And in this case, we would be checking the pH of the product to make sure that it's below 4.2. Down at the bottom, I have a can of tuna, and that is a low acid food. We're not adding any acid to it. We're putting it in a can and we're canning it under pressure. Some of you might have canned foods in your home kitchen under pressure. That type of food processing is highly regulated, and I don't recommend it for startup business. Even if you were to have someone manufacture for you a low acid food, the minimum orders are enormous, and it's just not a good, easy spot for us to start as a food entrepreneur. Next slide. Dried foods are really making a comeback. There's lots of dehydration going on right now. One of you is talking about freeze drying, and actually drying is a lower cost and just as effective if you put your product in a good package. There's 2 different types of products I'm showing here. One is noodles that are drying, and the other are vegetables and fruit that are being dehydrated. That's an Excalibur dehydrator. And I like that type of dehydrator because it has both a thermostat and a fan in it. And the air travels in a circular motion across each of those trays. It's really effective. And you can put a lot of product in a small space. And it really doesn't use a lot of energy, so it's not expensive to run. Many times people will buy multiple dehydrators like that to actually scale their business, and they're very reasonably cost. When you think about dried foods, we're talking about water activity is our hurdle to spoilage, and water activity is measured on a scale of 0 to 1. And our target for dried foods is below 0.8. And actually, we want it to be as low as 0.6 so that we don't experience any mold. So if you're doing a dried food, we will have to check the water activity to make sure that it's in a safe zone. Next slide. Frozen foods. I think the frozen food aisle actually in the grocery store is expanding. And freezing is a really popular way to create a barrier to spoilage. Because once you freeze your food product and you put it in the freezer, we can have 12, 18 months shelf life if we use good packaging materials. I really recommend that you freeze your food items at a very low temperature. Example is ice cream. Ice cream is frozen after it's filled into its container at -25 or colder degrees Fahrenheit. Because the colder the freezer is, the smaller the ice crystals and the higher the quality the food is. I think one example of ice cream that I like to share with somebody as an example is if you have a birthday party and you have your ice cream out and it's sitting there after everyone gets their ice cream and cake and it starts to melt, then you put it in your home freezer, and the next time you go to have that ice cream, the sides are all squishy and maybe there's some ice on top. That's because that freezer in your home kitchen is probably only at 10 degrees Fahrenheit. And so it had a slow freeze when it went back into the freezer. Just an example of what I mean about having a really cold temperature for freezing. Frozen distribution can be costly, But sometimes we use freezing as a way to extend shelf life. So for instance, if you're doing a baked product, I once went to a cookie company down in Southern Oregon. They were producing 10,000 cookies a week, and they would pack their cookies 6 in a bag. And then I think they had probably 2 dozen of those cookies in a box, and those boxes would go into the freezer. And then when they were ready to ship them to the customer, they took them out of the freezer and either delivered them or shipped them. And it was a great way for them to be able to produce a lot of product ahead of time and be able to ship when their orders came in. Next slide. Refrigerated foods. Refrigeration is another hurdle to spoilage. And for distribution, we need a 60 to 90-day shelf life. So if you're going to do a refrigerated food, I always like to talk about salsa because many of us make salsa. And this time of year when all the tomatoes have been harvested and your peppers are ripe and you're pulling your onions out of the ground, it's a great time to make salsa. And the way to extend the shelf life is to make sure that the pH is below 4.2. And the way that we do that is with vinegar and lemon juice. And then also we can extend the shelf life of a refrigerated food by having all of the ingredients that we're going to use in the product at refrigerated temperatures when we put them together to create the final product. So process in a refrigerated or very cold room. And then you do have to distribute that product in a refrigerated truck or in coolers with ice. Or when you bring it to the farmer's market, you would have to make sure the temperature is correct as well. Next slide. Baked goods. Baked goods are actually one of the lowest barriers to entry for commercial home baking kind of cottage industry. And for baking, the thing that's great about baking is that when that product comes out of the oven, it's pretty much sterile. If you've baked it and the temperature inside has gotten up to around 200 degrees where the steam is coming off, then the shelf life of that product will be pretty good. The problem is when we take it out of the oven and the steam from the food, from the bread or the cookies or whatever you're making, evaporates and there's stuff in the air, for instance, flour from you when you mix the product, the flour can land on the surface of the bread. And then that's where you'll see mold starting to grow as the product ages. The other tricky thing about baked goods is that they seem to go stale over time. So depending on what type of baked good you're making, there is some different tricks for keeping products a little bit longer. In fact, in the baking industry, sometimes if you can just get one more day on the shelf life of your bread, you can really help your bottom line. Again, we're using water activity as our hurdle, and the target for this is below 0.84. And let's go to the next slide. So let's talk a little bit about formulation. So what we want to do is take a look at the recipe that we're using and understand exactly what's going on. So most people are making a recipe using volumetric measurements. And what I want you to do is to work on converting your volumetric measurements into weight-based formulation. So I was going to say waste-based. I don't know why I'm tired, but weight-based formulation. And we're going to take some kind of vague instructions and make a very detailed process. So during this discovery, when you're changing from recipe to formulation, you'll also be able to develop some quality assurance standards for your product. And then from that information, you can scale up the formulation to higher volume manufacturing and production. So let's see the next slide. So this is an interesting slide talking about converting to a weight-based formula. And on the left-hand column, this is done in Excel, which is in Microsoft 365. You probably all have it on your computer. You may not have used it, but it's a great tool to learn about if you're making a food product. So you can create this chart in Excel. And typically I'll put the ingredients list on the left-hand side and then the measuring units in columns next to the name of the ingredient. And then finally in the final column, we'll end up with the weights. So what we're going to do is write out our original formula, and then we'll actually take that singular measurement of each ingredient and record the weight. So you can see that we were using, this is for chocolate chip cookies, we were using 2 1/4 cups of all-purpose flour, and then we weighed it and we found out it was 300 grams. And then we just went down everything in the recipe and recorded the volumetric measurement from our original recipe and then the final weight in grams. And then we add everything up. So you can see down at the bottom, there's 1,461 grams of the total batch weight. Next slide. And then this is where we do the math. And everybody learned this math in grade school. It's just that we don't always put it into application. And believe me, I'm terrible at math, but somehow I figured out how to do this. So once we have everything totaled up, so you see the total weight at the bottom, we're going to do something that's a little bit confusing. We're going to actually take the smaller weight of each item and divide it by the larger weight of the total batch. So you can see it says 340 grams of chocolate chips divided by the total weight of the batch, 1461.1, ends up being 23.27% of the total batch. We multiplied it by 100 to get that percentage. And then you just go through and do that with each ingredient. The great thing about Excel is that you can set up formulas inside of Excel so that if one of your batch numbers changes, your final percentage or weight will end up correcting and correlating to that change very easily. So let's go to the next slide. So this is just kind of giving the vague processes, like a recipe from your grandma. Like I had this recipe and it was interesting talking to my mom about it. It was actually my dad's mom's cookie recipe. And my grandfather owned a dairy, and so they were making butter. And it took my mom years to figure this out, but my grandma's recipe said 1 cube of butter. And she was Italian, so English was second language to her. And she meant 1 pound, but all of us thought it was a 1/4 pound, right? So, but once my mom figured out that it was actually a pound, that my grandma meant that a cube was a pound, then the cookies started tasting right, and everyone in our family was so excited. So anyway, this is the vague description of the recipe. Let's go to the next one. And look, this is about 3 times the information and much more detail describing exactly how to make the cookie. Some of you may be wondering, why do I need this information? The first reason you need the information is because you're not always going to be making the product, and you need to be able to train someone else to do this work. And the second reason is for your licensing, you have to be able to show all of this information to the Department of Agriculture. So you can see that there's an exact temperature of the oven. It's telling you what to do with the dry ingredients, and then talking in detail about creaming the butter, eggs, and sugar, and exactly how to mix for 45 seconds at the low speed and then 30 seconds at the high speed. So when you can write these details down about how you make your product, it'll make it much easier for you to repeat the process and make sure that your product is the same every time. And don't worry, they're going to give you all of these slides. Next slide. So let's talk about food safety next. So the hurdles that I've been talking about, I mentioned them when we were talking about the different types of food, are pH, water activity, and Brix. And the pH is the measurement of the amount of acid present in your food. The water activity is a measurement of the amount of moisture that's available for bacteria to grow. And the refractometer measures percentage of sucrose. Let's look at the next slide. So food safety is really essential for your food business. And there's actually the Food Safety Modernization Act, which was announced in 2011 during the Obama administration. And if you want to scale your product and produce it for a grocery store, many of the grocery stores will require that you have this intact for your manufacturing. And it starts with what's called CGMP, which is Current Good Manufacturing Practices. So this is just really going to help you assure that you produce your product in a safe manner. And there is a food facility registration attestation. So that there would give you a number for your facility. It's a federal requirement that you sign up for. So if you have your own manufacturing kitchen, you have to do that registration. And they sort of give you like a social security number for your facility. Next slide. There is something called hazard analysis critical control point. And we're really using our standard operating procedures. And if you think back a few slides to the very detailed list of how you make chocolate chip cookies, really this hazard analysis starts with that detailed description. So we want to know times and temperatures and all that kind of stuff. But the three main contamination points that we see in food manufacturing are biological, which could be pathogenic microorganisms. You've probably heard about food recalls. There was one quite a few years ago where they recalled a juice called Odwalla, which was being manufactured and distributed raw. We had a couple people pass away and some people got very sick. That was because the juice was not pasteurized and there were pathogenic microorganisms in there. The next one that we have to worry about is chemical, which is sanitizers, allergens, and radiological. So one time I was at Tillamook Cheese, like many years ago in the 1980s. And at the time they were making butter in their processing plant in Tillamook. And I was a butter judge in college. So they said, hey, Sarah, will you try our butter? So I was like, oh, sure. I always love tasting fresh butter coming out of the churn. I would be happy to taste it. I tasted it and I went, oh no, stop. There's something wrong. There's chemical sanitizer in this butter. You have to stop production. Lots of times in manufacturing, we have what's called clean in place. And in the dairy industry, they may have been the first to do it, but basically they keep everything in enclosed lines. You've probably seen how they made that. And you see all these big pieces of equipment and pipes going everywhere. Well, they just run the cleaning chemicals through the pipes. And if somebody forgets to turn the valve one way or another, then you could possibly get sanitizer into your food. And that actually happened when I was tasting. They were so embarrassed, but so grateful that I tasted the butter that day. And then lastly, we have physical, which could be something like metal or foreign material. One time when I was working in manufacturing, some of the guys from the kitchen came to the quality assurance lab and they said, Sarah, look what we found in the cottage cheese. And I was like, what is it? And I said, it's a tape measure, where you measure stuff. It fell out of the maintenance guy's pocket into the cottage cheese vat. And just think, if they hadn't noticed that, it would have been mixed into the food and then it would have had metal contamination and somebody could have swallowed it and really hurt themselves. But thankfully, We had people, mixing that were paying attention to their ingredients. And usually that type of contamination does come from an ingredient source. So those are just some stories about why it's important to understand hazard analysis and the three main things we're looking for. Yeah, radioactive milk from Chernobyl. Exactly. Next slide. So the next thing we need to do is look at preventative controls, which are all of the things that we do in manufacturing to either monitor what we're doing or to, hit certain temperatures for a certain amount of time. And then the sanitation, which is the cleanup, and then making sure that we don't have cross-contamination or allergen contamination. Next slide. So it's your responsibility as a food manufacturer to really monitor and use those preventative controls in your production, and then have some kind of a plan if something goes wrong. And normally this is with temperature. So if you're cooking your barbecue sauce and you're bottling it at 185, and then something happens where you're called away from doing your bottling and the temperature drops. It drops, it gets cooler. Then you would actually need to have a corrective action where you'd reheat that barbecue sauce before you could actually bottle it. And then you need to calibrate your tools that you use. So your thermometer, your pH meter, all of those things need to be calibrated. This one time, I worked on this candy bar for a candy company down in Medford. It was actually, I copied the Snickers bar, and but it was organic. And so I had made the nougat layer with peanuts in it. It was so good. And then I made this delicious caramel. And after I turned over, I'd made the bars so many times. I knew my formulas right. I turned everything over to them. But like 3 or 4 months after I gave them the formula, they called me and they're like, we're going to pay for you to come down to Medford. We'll take you out to breakfast. We're going to have you check out the process. We think you made a mistake. I was like, oh no, what could it be? The only thing I think it was their thermometer wasn't calibrated. So I brought my thermometer, I made sure it was right. And sure enough, they'd set up a small processing line. They were going to show me my process. So the first thing I did was, okay, we got all the sugar and everything in the pot we were boiling. I said, okay, where's your thermometer? Can you pull out your thermometer? So they got their thermometer and they put it in. I put mine in, and theirs was 10 degrees lower than mine. So of course their caramel never turned out right. Their thermometer wasn't calibrated. Boy, was I glad I had a good thermometer. I thought of doing that. So basically I solved the problem like in the first 10 minutes of looking at what was going on. So just that's where you use a little bit of science in the stuff that you do. Next slide. So you also do have to do some record keeping and keep track of what you're doing. And you can do that really simply with a batch sheet, or like a record for each day you manufacture. And you would record all of this information on there. And sometimes you have to keep those records for quite some time. For sure, you need to keep them for the shelf life of your product. Let's go ahead to the next slide. And also you need to have a plan if there's a recall. So recalls are now federally mandated sometimes, and mostly recalls happen because of ingredient suppliers. I had quite a few clients a few years ago who were in a peanut butter recall. There was a company down in New Mexico. They had birds up above their peanut butter vat that were pooping into the peanut butter. I'm not kidding. It got into the buckets of peanut butter, and peanut butter is an interesting product because it has low water activity. So I think the manufacturer got a little over comfortable with this whole process, and they thought, oh, it's just a couple birds, no problem. But actually it was a tremendous problem, and it had an effect on a lot of people. So my recommendation is that on your batch sheet that you're going to create, that you actually put your expiration date or your code date on there. And then when you put together your invoices, you just write those code dates on your invoices so that you can track your product back through your invoicing and batch sheets. It's very simple and straightforward. Next slide. Okay, and now labeling. In 1991, I don't remember who the president was then. Does anybody remember who was president in 1991? Was it Reagan? I don't know who it was.
I think it was
Anyway,
Bush.
was it Bush?
I think so. 91
Could have
or
been.
Clinton.
Clinton, I think.
It was Clinton. Okay, so they were the ones who decided to enact the Nutrition Labeling Education Act. And before then, people were not required to put nutrition data on the labels of the food. And some people did it in the health food industry, but it wasn't widely done. And also, we didn't always know which ingredients were in the food. So they decided that we really needed to change that. And that's when the first standardized nutrition label came out. And I was working in a food processing laboratory at the time out in Corbett called Columbia Food Labs. And they did all of the testing of potatoes that you now find the data in the USDA database. At the time, we didn't really have computers like we have now. I remember that was the first place I ever had a computer that I had to learn like how to type and figure out how to save stuff. I don't even think we had email. And so we were taking all these foods and doing chemical analysis and collecting data. And that is one way to get your nutrition label, your nutrition facts panel done, but now most people do it in a database. And we do recommend that if you're going to make a claim, so let's say you're going to do low sodium, that you would actually have the sodium checked, and then you can add that data into the database so that you have an accurate label. And then I always recommend that you make sure and have some way to proofread the information you're putting in your package. I have one more story. When I was working at Gardenburger, I was responsible for 4 new products that came out, and we were a fairly large company at the time. I think we're at like $15 million, maybe $20 million in sales. And one of the nutrition labels got messed up in the database, and there was I left off eggs, which is an allergen, from the ingredient statement. And they scapegoated me, and I got sent home for 2 weeks from work. 2 weeks from work. They totally scapegoated me. And then I was at the corporate offices and I talked to the HR person. She's like, I'm going to pay you for those 2 weeks. Just think of it as vacation. But anyway, what happened was they had loaded all these freezers across the US because they were distributing from different frozen storages. And they sent employees out to the warehouses to either destroy the product or put ingredient statement labels over the ingredient statement panels on all the packages. Yeah. So it's always good to proofread everything that you have printed, and also have your Department of Agriculture inspector proofread your package. That's one of their responsibilities. Next slide. Okay, so as a food manufacturer, it is your responsibility to determine the shelf life of your product. There is not a book for you to look it up in. And there's really, you need to work with a certified third party, one of the food testing labs in town. And I think the team at Hacienda has a list of some food testing labs. And there's kind of 4 types of things that we want to do. One is we want to check for microbiology. So which bacteria are in the food. Sometimes our food can be rancid from I guess what would be something that tastes rancid or stale? Maybe you have some old potato chips or something, I don't know. And then you need to taste the product. And then also some types of products where they have really long shelf lives, you might want to do an acceleration, which is when you store the food at a higher temperature for a shorter amount of time to accelerate it. Next slide. Okay, so the Food Innovation Center is located in downtown Portland. We're an agricultural experiment station, and we have three main areas of research. We do sensory and consumer science, which is like the Coke and Pepsi Challenge. We have product and process development, which is the group that I work in, helping people get their formulas set up straight. And then we have the Western Regional Center for Enhancement of Food Safety, which you can go on there and learn all about HACCP and CGMPs and PCQI. So those are the three main areas, and that's our website. Let's see what the next slide is. Oh, that's my podcast if you want to listen to it. And I don't know if I put the Regional Food Business Center in here. Is there a slide about that? Okay, I'll just talk about that, but you can email me at sarah.masoni@oregonstate.edu. And then there's a website, I'll type it in the chat. It's called Northwest Rocky Mountain Food Business.com. So go to that website. So it's Northwest Rocky Mountain Food Business.com, and there's an Oregon page, but you can just click on Connect with Us. And then you can select, you want to meet with someone, you can select my name, and then I will, I'll get an email, and then I'll send you an email with a link to schedule for.
Thank you. That was a great introduction. I don't know if there's anything else that I want to say, but happy to be here. And I think this is my third or fourth time presenting, and I always enjoy kind of sharing whatever information that I have to help you all access capital, whether it's tomorrow or sometimes you don't need it for a few years, but you want to be able to kind of think about it and be ready and not make any mistakes now that could hurt your chances of getting capital down the road. So even if you don't need capital today, hopefully this presentation will kind of be helpful, so you can kind of think about what you may need in the future if you're going to grow beyond what you have today. So today I'm going to talk about just startup capital options, and really talk about different types of capitals, give you a sense of what your options are, how some types of capital are better, I shouldn't say better, are more appropriate for certain situations versus others. And then really a heavy emphasis on business loans, since business loans make up for about 95% of the capital that a business uses to grow or sustain their business. So we'll put a heavy emphasis on business loans. What I will do today is I have a standard presentation that I will go through, and then I'll pause at certain times. And if you have a question during my presentation, feel free to put it in chat, and during the pause we can answer that, or when we take a little pause between sections, I can take questions at that point. So with that, let me go ahead and share my screen here, and you should see a presentation. All right, so we'll get started. I believe this slide deck has or will be sent to everybody, so you can access this information at a later time if you want. Again, my name is Robin Wang, and there is my contact information if you want to connect with me afterwards. So today, I've done this presentation sometimes in person and in Zoom. Kind of introductions don't always work that well. So what I will ask is that people just kind of quickly introduce themselves in the chat, and that will also save a little bit of time. But then, kind of really jump into the different types of capital that businesses, particularly startup businesses, can have to grow their businesses and start their businesses. And then talk a little bit about some additional resources, whether it's through me or some of the other resources that are available in the community if you have questions or want to contemplate, getting capital. And then we'll have kind of a final round of Q&A at the end, but like I said, we'll have some breaks in between, and we'll open up for Q&A, in those breaks. So with that, if you could just put in the chat, just your name, a quick one-sentence summary of your business, and if you have any particular questions about business loans, and during that first break session, I can go ahead and answer them or make sure that I cover those topics, in the remaining sections. Okay, so in terms of the business, the capital that you may have for your business, there's really four, and actually there's five sources of capital. The four that is most often kind of thought about for your business is listed in this graphic here, and we'll talk about each of these in more detail. But starting up here in the upper left-hand corner, we have debt financing, and that's really loans. That's money that you borrow. Then there's also grant funding, and grant funding is everybody loves grant funding because it's free money. It's money that sometimes some government agencies give out or some programs give out, and they're targeted for a specific use or particular use, a type of company, and there's no obligations or typically very few obligations to that funding. So it's great, but there's also some challenges that we'll get into around that. Then there's self-funding. So that's money that you have personally, or the owners of the company personally have, that you then contribute to the company and allow the company to start and grow. And then the final type of funding is equity funding, and that's money that a third party, an investor typically, will give to your business, and they don't expect to be repaid, but they usually have an expectation to have some share of the business, some maybe 10%, 20% of the business, in exchange for that contribution of capital into your business. And with that also becomes the issue about control. In most corporations, the more shares that you have of the corporation or the business, the more control that you have. So equity financing is a different type of financing, not appropriate for many businesses, but definitely a type of financing that's out there. And then the fifth type of financing that is not listed in this chart, but and is often not thought about, but I think is critically important, is profits. Your business grows. If your business grows and is able to generate profits, some of those profits can be reinvested back into the business to grow your business. When I had my business, we had our main office in Portland. We're a very regional kind of company, and we had our main office in Portland, and Portland was doing well. It was generating, pretty good profits. And when we had an opportunity to open up a new region, and the first new region was in the Salt Lake City region, we basically took some of the profits that we were generating from Portland, and instead of paying ourselves, the owners, with that profit, we decided to roll that money back into the business and pay for the cost to establish and expand our business into Salt Lake City. So it's beautiful because we don't owe anybody any money. We don't give up any share or control of business, and we're able to get the money that the business generates and puts that into growth in other regions. And then we did that one more time when we operated or launched our operations in the Denver Boulder area. So so don't, people don't often think about profits, and that's, business owners typically want the profits for themselves, and that's totally fine. But don't, lose sight that that is a very viable source of capital because it's all of your control. You don't have to pay it back, and you don't give up any equity, or you don't give up any control in your business. So wanted to kind of take a moment to mention that now, because I won't be talking about that in the rest of the slide. So let's talk about each of these fundings in a little bit more detail. So first is self-funding, and every entrepreneur, I would say 99.9% of all businesses, there is some element of self-funding, and again, that is money that you, the owner, the entrepreneur of the business, or if there's more than one of you, you and your partners, you make a personal contribution to the business. And the sources of that capital could be your own personal savings. Some people tap into, maybe they've worked for many years in kind of a corporate world. They have some retirement accounts, 401ks. There's an opportunity to take some of those money. It's a little bit risky, but you can take some of that money from your retirement accounts and put it into your business, or loan it from your retirement accounts into your business. So that's an example of self-funding. There's personal credit cards, and this is done all the time. For many businesses, is you have a personal credit card and you have a credit limit, and you spend money on the personal credit card, and but you buy things on behalf of your business. In essence, that is the type of loan or funding that you yourself is making or investing into the business. There could be outside income. A lot of times, particularly if there's household or a little bit excess or available household income, someone else in your household is earning money, and you're able to, if there's the sufficient kind of earnings, you're able to kind of take some of those earnings and contribute it to the business. So that's done all the time. And then there's also IDA savings accounts, or saving matches. This is a very powerful program. IDA stands for Individual Development Account. And it's a program that's offered by the government, and actually multiple layers of the government. And it offers the opportunity for up to a 5-to-1 match in funding. So if you contribute, let's say $2,000 into an IDA account, you leave the money there for a specified period of time. Oftentimes these IDA programs have some training, particularly the ones around business. There might be some training programs about how you run or manage your business finances. And at the conclusion of those training programs, you've kind of graduated. You're eligible for a 5-to-1 match, and all of a sudden now you have $10,000 that is available that you can now use to fund your business. So I believe Hacienda CDC has a IDA program, and there are also other organizations in the Portland area that have a IDA savings program. There are some requirements. Like I said, you have to do certain things. There are also some income eligibility requirements. But if you're able to qualify for one, it's a powerful program because it offers a pretty good match that you can then use for your business. So the advantages of this is that it's very flexible. It's your money, right? You can do anything that you want to do. And there's usually no formal application process. Again, it's your money. You make the decision. There might be a form that you have to fill out to transfer the money, but you don't need anybody's approval. You might need your partner's approval, but you don't need a third party kind of bank or investor's approval. So it can be pretty simple. The disadvantages is you're typically not talking about a lot of money, and unless you're able to get this kind of 5-to-1 match. And so for that reason, sometimes your ability to use that money and grow your business is potentially slow. You know, if you only have $1,000 in savings that you can contribute to the business, there's only so much that you can do. And then always there's that risk to your savings and retirement funds. You know, you could end up losing it, and that could have other consequences, you know, for your personal finances. So I saw that there was a question. So let me pause here and see. I forgot who raised their hand, but
It was me. I was just wondering, with that IDA program, is that a like a grant type situation? Like when you finish the program and the requirements, is that something that's given to you, or is that something that you have to pay back?
it's given to you. It's like a grant.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I did see that Mia had her hand raised earlier. Mia, do you have a question to ask?
So I'm not sure if this is relevant for the IDA program. So if I had 20 previous year tax return filed with joint filed with a partner, and that shows income is if it is exceeding, or is there IDA program has the income any limit income ratio?
Like income restrictions?
Restriction, yes.
Yeah, every program is a little bit different. That there are income restrictions and there are asset kind of net worth you know, restrictions. So that's, you know, that's a question that you can ask. You know, does Hacienda have an IDA program for business?
We do, yes. We actually have a wait list at the moment because we've spent the funds that were made available for us, but we do have that wait list. We have a specialist on staff. So if you are interested and you're currently part of our program, we welcome you to speak with your advisors so that they can get you more information and have you added to the wait list if it's something of interest to you.
And Lisa also has a question, I believe. Lisa, if you wish to ask it yourself, otherwise I can ask it for you since you put it in the chat.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I did an IDA account program a couple years ago with another program, NEA, and I completed. I got the full grant and everything. Can I still go ahead and apply to, again, another IDA account with a new program, or will that be a problem since I already had one before?
Yeah, I know that. Sorry,
ahead.
go ahead.
No, I was going to defer to you.
I was just going to say that I believe that you can have a maximum of 2 in a lifetime. So yes, if you've already completed one with NAYA, you do have the opportunity to do an IDA with another organization or even with NAYA again. I know that there's different IDA programs as well. So the one that we offer as part of our program is specific to business that Robin mentioned.
Yes.
But there's also ones that are for vehicles, for example, or home ownership. So there's a lot of different kind of programs available if you're interested, and it's just a matter of speaking with a specialist.
And Melina,
The one that I did is the IDA business with NEA. And there was the procedures, and there's also requirement after receiving the grant.
Right, yeah, and we do offer that business IDA. So if you were interested, you would have to be part of our program, and we could get you added to that wait list.
Melina, to further extend the question, are you able to have an IDA with 2 different organizations at the same time if they're the same type of IDA?
That's a good question. I think that would be a question to pose to Nora, who's our IDA specialist on hand. I'm not familiar with.
Okay.
I did see that Mia's asked in the chat also, can we explain the IDA program briefly? And I see that Juan has responded here. It's essentially a program where you work with an advisor to save a certain amount of money. Then after you graduate, you get that money plus a 5 times that amount match. So, you know, the example Robin gave is, you know, you put aside a certain amount of money at the end of the term that you've agreed upon in, you know, beforehand. You would then receive your funds back along with that 500% match, essentially.
And I think the percentage may vary depending on the program. Also, Luisa
Yeah.
said that NAYA told her no with regards to having an IDA with two different organizations at once.
You can't, what they explained to me is that they also have the IDA for housing. You can't have two IDA account corresponding. It have to be one at a time. And also there is some max. So just because you save $3,000 doesn't mean they'll match $5 to every dollar you save. So if I'm not mistaken, I think it was $9,000 that they were able to max plus your saving.
Yeah, to Alex's point, there's different programs and different dollar amounts. When you work with an IDA specialist, they're able to work with you and really kind of figure out the math behind what's appropriate to save. Because that's the other thing is, you know, 500% match sounds amazing, but you also don't want to overextend yourself either. You want to make sure that what you're able to put aside is a reasonable amount. And that you also, with this advisor or specialist, you identify a term that's comfortable for you. So really, there's a lot more kind of detail that goes into making this decision. But certainly, it's a resource that should be taken advantage of if you qualify.
And then there's a question for Robin as well. It says, hey, Robin, my name is Letty. We are starting our coffee shop style business. We're looking for a small loan to open up. Thanks for the information. So I think that's just more of a comment than anything, unless that was a question, Letty, and you want to reinstate the question.
I'll cover that in a few slides.
Okay, awesome. Juana, is that a
Okay.
question? No? Okay, I would say we continue.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we'll move on to the next type of funding, and that is grant funding. And as I said earlier, everybody loves grant funding because it's free money. And you know, there's no requirement for paying. And sources of grant funding often come, a lot of times, most of it comes from government sources. So there's various government programs that are out there to, they want to incentivize or support certain businesses, certain industries, or certain regions. So, you know, sometimes, you know, if, let's say this, I'm making this up, right? So if the state of Oregon wants to support, you know, the semiconductor industry, which actually this is pretty actually happened, you know, they will make grants to help semiconductor companies, give them incentive to operate and launch, you know, new factories in Oregon. Prosper Portland has, you know, occasionally has some grants. Sometimes it's tied to kind of these business improvement districts. So, you know, maybe there's this district that, you know, they want to focus in on, they want to kind of help revitalize. And so they may offer some grants. If you open up a business, a storefront in this specific region, or, you know, 5-block area, they will give you some grants to, you know, maybe improve the storefront or put up signage. And then, so there's a lot of it comes from government. Sometimes it comes from corporations as part of their marketing effort. Comcast, the cable, you know, kind of internet provider company, they've been known to have, you know, grants over time, where they provide a couple $1,000s to businesses, and you know, it's more part of their marketing campaign to sell and brand their internet business services. But you know, as part of that campaign, they offer grants. And then there's also foundations, and you know, these are organizations that, you know, are set up to give out money. They're usually established by, you know, wealthy individuals or families, you know, for the purpose of charitable work. And so they give out money to, you know, support certain initiatives. And you know, it's usually at the whim of whatever they're interested in. So those are some of the sources of it. And as I said, the biggest advantage of grants is that there's no repayment. I think there's several disadvantages of grants. First, it's very competitive. Someone might say, okay, we have $100,000 and we're going to give out $25,000 grants. You can probably bet if it's well promoted that, there's going to be probably several hundred, if not thousands of businesses that go after that grant. So your chances of receiving that are, just from a numbers perspective, going to be very competitive. The number of opportunities for grants is much more limited. Not everybody has free money to give out. So not only are the total amount of grants, usually smaller than other types of funding, but the individual funding that is offered are typically smaller. I hardly see any business grants that are above $10,000. It sometimes exists, and that's great if you qualify for one. But it's not a significant amount of capital. They usually have a very involved application process, so you have to fill out forms, you have to provide reports, and then there's usually some type of reporting process, kind of demonstrating how you use the funds and the impact of it. Sometimes they're simple, sometimes they can be, quite, convoluted. Another thing that I don't list here in the slide is that sometimes they're reimbursement grants. So, you have to spend the money first and then they'll reimburse you. So if you don't have the money to begin with, it makes it a challenge to take advantage of it. If you're seeking a grant of $10,000 to, put up signage, and this program says, yes, we'll reimburse your costs, that means you have to put up the signage, pay for the signage up front, and then wait anywhere from 30 to 90 days, however that process works, to get reimbursed for it. So that creates a challenge for businesses that don't have that money up front. So my kind of recommendation of grants is that, if you can get it, or if there's one that comes up that's a good fit for you and it's not an overbearing kind of application process, by all means, do it. It can't hurt, and you might get some free money out of it. But where I caution, business owners, some business owners I talk to, they say, well, my strategy for getting my business off the ground is to pursue grants. And if that's a strategy that you can pursue, I can almost bet that your business will not grow because of the challenges. So don't make grants a critical part of your funding strategy. They're nice to have, and if there's a good opportunity, by all means go for it, but they shouldn't be your only source of funding as part of your capital strategy. Any questions about grants?
Yeah, we did have a question in the chat. Lizette, did you want to ask?
Yes, sure. So besides the Prosper Portland website, what are some other good places that we can search for? Like, you mentioned categories of type of grants. So
yeah. I think it's that's the other challenge with grants, is that there's often not a clearinghouse of grants, right? If you want a loan, you can go to a bank and get a loan, right? With grants, it's not the same way. And so you have to be kind of connected. You have to know about, what opportunities, and you have to be listening for it. So it's, again, a little bit more of a challenge to find out about them. Prosper Portland has been, over the years, a clearinghouse for grants. So I would, sign up on their, I think it's a monthly list now. And every month they list, grants that they know of and share that with, the, Portland business community. I've recently seen a similar list that comes up once a month about once a month on the Portland Business Journal. And they will once a month have an article about, grants that businesses can pursue. Sometimes there's some overlap with the ones that are on the Portland site. Sometimes it's not. So it's a good one to sign up for. Usually a lot of the Portland Business Journal articles, if you sign up for their newsletter, it's free, but to read the article, you have to pay for the subscription. So I can't remember. Some of the articles are free, some of them are not. I can't remember if that's a free article, but I often do see a source of grant funding there. Another place that you can look at is Business Oregon. That's the state economic development agency, and I don't think they serve as a clearinghouse for other grants, but the state of Oregon does, occasionally offer grants, through the state, and they're often announced, there. And I think the last place I would recommend is, if your type of business has a corresponding government agency, associated with it, stay in touch with that, industry. If you're doing childcare, there's an agency in the state of Oregon that focuses on childcare, both regulation and support and guidance. And so, sometimes those organizations will announce grants, either the ones that they offer or ones that kind of come their way. So I think the best way is to kind of sign up on the various newsletters that are, relevant to your business.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to move to the next type of funding, and that's equity financing. And as I said earlier, this is financing where there's no expectation of repayment, but there is expectation that whoever gives you this money would have an ownership stake in your business. And an ownership stake is often referred to as an equity stake. They now become shareholders of your business. And so this could be a very simple case where you and a business partner want to launch a business, and you both contribute equal amounts to launch the business. And so you are 50-50 shareholders. You own 50% of the business, your business partner owns the other 50% of the business because you each contributed the same amount of money into the business. That's a form of, equity financing. The type that you see on like shows like Shark Tank and, you read about in the papers, those are more often like angel investors or venture capital investors. These are third parties. You typically don't have any kind of familial relationship, or it's not friends or family. It's, it's an organization. It's an individual who exists to make investments into money. So they happen to have, capital that they've set aside or that they've acquired for the purposes of investing into businesses. And so sources, I kind of covered the sources already. It could be friends and family. It could be business partners. It could be angel investors. It could be venture capital. Angel investors and venture capital investors, they're kind of the same and different in that they are third parties. Angel investors tend to, invest. They tend to be individuals, and they tend to invest smaller amounts when a business is young. Venture capital investors tend to invest in bigger amounts, and when the business is kind of more established and is going through a pretty rapid growth stage. Most businesses do not get equity financing other than friends and family and the partners of the business. When you start talking about angel investors and venture capital investors, these are businesses that are going to grow significantly. And if you're looking at operating a restaurant, if you're looking to make a sauce or make a food product, oftentimes any equity financing that you're going to get is mostly limited to friends and family and business partners that you have. Now, if let's say you're making a sauce or a food product and things are going well, they're going very well, right? And sales are growing, customers are excited, and let's say you want to go national and go beyond the Portland area, and there is interest in taking your sauce product, food product nationally. That will typically require a significant amount of capital, and at that stage, that's when you might look for angel investors or venture capital investors to really grow the business. So you could start off small with friends and family, maybe a business partner, and if things go well and continue to grow, then you look for significantly more capital from angel investors and venture capital. As I said earlier, the advantages is the money typically does not need to be repaid. But the disadvantage is that you give up some ownership and control of the business, and you also give up some profits. So if the company, generates at the end of the year, $1,000 profit, a business owner or shareholder that owns 20% of the company is typically entitled to 20% of the profits. So they would get, $200 if you had $1,000 in profits. So you're giving up some profits, you're giving up some ownership, and you're giving up some control. Now, if we're talking about 10% of the company, typically 10% of the company, the holder of that equity or shares doesn't have that much control. But when you start talking about 30, 40%, and definitely 50% of the company, then these other shareholders can start influencing the direction of the company, who's running the company, how additional investments are spent, kind of key strategic questions about the business. So something to keep in mind. Several years ago, I was working with a business owner, and had a pretty successful kind of product concept, clothing product concept. They had investors, venture capital, angel investors lined up, ready to give them the money. And they came to me for debt financing. I said, you got all these investors lined up. Why do you want debt? And she told me that all these investors wanted me to do something different than the way I want to run my business. And so, she decided that she didn't want to give up that control, wanted to maintain control, and opted to get debt financing, because we'll talk about that in a few moments. You don't give up that control with equity finance or with debt financing. Any questions on equity financing? Okay. I will go into the last, but the biggest. We'll spend most of our time here on debt financing. And, a debt is a loan, right, that you promise to pay back, and typically with interest by a specified date. So take car loan, student loan, mortgage, right? You borrow some money typically from a bank upfront, and you typically have a payment plan. So a car loan, maybe it's a $20,000 car loan, and every month for 5 years, I'm going to make this number up, you pay $500 a month. And after 5 years, your loan is paid off and your car is, free and clear. So that is a loan. You can get a similar loan for business purposes, whether it's buying commercial real estate, an office or building that you operate your business from. You could get a loan for buying inventory. If you're making goods and products, you need the raw materials. So you can get a loan to buy the raw materials. And then, as you sell the products, your finished products, you're going to get revenue and hopefully, some profits, and you use that money to repay the loan. So that's, again, borrowing your money. Sources of debt financing, the vast majority of debt financing comes from banks and credit unions. So where you put your money in, they take that money, couple it with other depositors, and make it available as loans. Whether it's a mortgage loan, an auto loan, or a business loan. There are organizations called CDFIs, and these are the CDFI means Community Development Financial Institution. They're typically nonprofit organizations, and I used to run a CDFI in the Portland area. And as a nonprofit lender, their motivation is often not to make money. Whereas a bank, they're a for-profit business. This is America. You know, you are all in business to make money, just like a bank is in a business to make money. They're in it for making money. Whereas a CDFI, as a nonprofit, their mission is not to make money. Their mission is often to support a mission, a cause, a population, you know, a particular, you know, niche of the population. So they're mission driven, and while they want their loans paid back, they're not motivated. They're, you know, by profit. They're willing to sacrifice profit in order to pursue mission, and so they can often be much more flexible in who they make the loans available to. And they are a big part of financing in the local community, especially for young businesses that, you know, will have a challenge in getting a conventional bank loan. Businesses can, just like a personal credit card, they can get a business credit card, and, you know, the credit cards, you don't have to pay. I always advise businesses to try to pay the credit cards off every month, but you don't have to. You can borrow the money. The disadvantage with credit cards is that, you know, they carry a pretty high expense interest rate, so it's very expensive to borrow money from a credit card, but it's relatively easy to get a loan in the form of a credit card. And then there's a whole bunch of alternative lenders, and some are good and some are not good. You know, there are micro lenders that are very specific for a particular industry. I knew a lender, all they financed was dentist office. They know that industry really well, inside and out. They know all the players. They understand the financial statements of all dentist office, and so they're kind of experts in that, and that's all they focus on, and they know that industry kind of really well. But then there are also these kind of hard money lenders, these predatory lenders. They make the money very available. As a business owner, you've probably seen. If you've not seen, you will see soon. You know, get $40,000 approved in 48 hours. They make it really easy to get capital, but they're often very, very expensive or have very onerous payment terms. I've seen equivalent interest rates as high as 95%. So that's really expensive, whereas banks are typically capped at 30%. And many of these lenders, they will say, oh, you know, to repay us, we'll just take a small amount of money from your bank account every single business day. Now, that might seem small, it might seem fine to begin with, but most businesses have cycles, and, you know, during the slow cycle, if someone is taking, you know, money out of your bank account every single day, you might run into some significant cash flow challenges. And I've seen business owners, you know, all they do when they're in that situation is try to figure out how they can make that next day's payment. All of a sudden, they're no longer running their business. They're just, all they're worried about is, how do I make that next day's payment? So be very careful about that. So in terms of, you know, debt financing, the banks and, you know, they have their regulatory requirements. You know, you put your money in a bank account and you expect your money to, you know, be able to take it out at whether it's tomorrow or 5 years from now. And in order to ensure that and kind of establish trust in the industry, you know, the federal government guarantees those deposits. And in exchange for those guarantees, they regulate the banks so that they can only make loans that are so certain risk. If it's too risky, they will prohibit the bank from making those loans. So that's a factor in how banks decide whether to approve a loan or not. And they'll look at a broad variety of eligibility criteria, oftentimes your credit score, your income, how you're going to use your funds, collateral. They look at a whole bunch of things to evaluate whether they can take on that risk. Because again, keep in mind, they have to make that money available to their depositors. And as I said, you know, other things that you may want to consider is just the interest rates or other services that, you know, sometimes often, you know, offered in conjunction with of the loan. Here's another way of looking at the landscape of lenders. You know, you have on this column here interest rates, you know, from low to high. You have on this column here the risk tolerance that a lender is willing to offer. And you see down here, banks and credit unions, they typically have low interest rates loans, but they only accept a certain amount of risk. They're not going to take risky loans. And you'll see kind of going out here, other lenders, the hard money lenders, yeah, they're going to accept more risk, but they're going to be very expensive. Same thing with predatory lenders. They're going to take on that very risky loan, but they're going to charge a lot of money for that. You then have in this range here where, you know, the interest rates are a little higher, but not, you know, not significantly higher. But, you know, these lenders here, these CDFIs and kind of micro lenders, they're willing to, you know, take on a little bit more risk because they're not profit driven, or their capital is a little bit more flexible so that, you know, they can work with some loan losses. So just a different way of looking at the landscape of lenders that may be out there. Let me pause there and see if there's any questions about the types of lenders that may be out there, or loans in general.
If you do have a question, feel free to just unmute yourself and ask, or raise your hands.
All right, I'm not seeing anything, so I will just keep on going. I talked about this a little bit, but how, you know, to tell if you might be looking at a predatory loan. First obvious sign is fast cash. You'll see the ads, 48 hours, get funded in 48 hours. A bank loan, a credit union loan, it will typically take a month to 2 months to get that loan. So if you know that you're going to get capital, need capital in some at some point, don't give yourself time. Don't wait until the last minute. If you want to make that investment tomorrow, don't start the application process today. Instead, you know, give yourself at least 2, maybe even 3 months to shop around and go through the review process. So if you see fast cash, that's a sign. You see a very simple online application that, you know, really easy to apply for. That's a telltale sign that it's going to be a predatory loan. You know, if you are looking at a loan offering and the terms and interest rates are buried, they're in the fine print, it's hard to find. That's again, you know, they don't want to reveal that the effective interest rate is 95%. You walk into a bank, you know, and you ask them, you know, how much are your loans? They typically are able to give you a range, you know, immediately. They'll say, you know, this type of loan for your situation, you know, is typically between, you know, 10% and 15%, whatever is appropriate. So they're, you know, they may not be fully transparent, but if you ask someone, you ask a loan officer, they should be able to give you a range. A bank will also give you the total cost of the loan. So if you borrow, you know, the money and you pay it back over 5 years or whatever the term of the loan is, they should be able to calculate and tell you, all right, you know, you're going to pay for that $5,000 loan, you're going to pay $1,000 in interest over the course of the loan. That's something that they should be able to give you, you know, easily. Whereas if you're talking to a predatory lender, they typically will not make that total cost of borrowing known to you, or at least make it difficult for you to figure that out. And you know, if they don't do any evaluation about your ability to repay the loan, and they, you know, they kind of just say, yeah, we'll just make this happen. again, that is a sign that you're talking to a predatory lender. You know, a bank or credit union, they will have a conversation with you about loan repayment terms, how much, how often, and those details. So just, you know, these are things that if it's in general, if it seems too good to be true, I would always, you know, be wary about, you know, the type of loan that you might be getting. Gabriela has a question.
Yep.
Yes. Hi. My legal status is being an international student, so I'm able to have a company, to own a company and not work on the company. But of course, I don't have any kind of credit in this country. So that's why also I'm creating, I have created this company, but I don't know if the company can create little by little a score or a credit history, even if the owner, the 100% owner is an international student that is not a resident, you know? So in the future, yeah, because finally I would like to, in the future, when the sales, when the revenue grow, look for the residents through the company, but at the same time, it's like I don't have access to credit as an individual, so it's a kind of a circle.
It's a little tricky. Yeah, yeah. It's a kind of a chicken and egg type thing. And absolutely, I think that is definitely a challenge that a lot of immigrants, you know, have in the United States with getting capital, because they don't have a credit score. So yeah, a couple recommendations on that. One is there are a couple lenders out there that have loan products, and lenders meaning banks and credit unions that have loan products that are specifically designed to support immigrants or folks that, you know, may not be documented or may not have a social security number. I don't know exactly how they do it, but, you know, these are you know, typically reputable organizations. The one that comes to mind in the Portland area is Point West Credit Union. And I know they work with a lot of immigrant communities and have loan products, you know, to support their unique needs. So you can check in with them and see if they have something that can help you. There are, you know, I think whenever someone has a thin credit file, whether it's an immigrant or they just never borrowed money in the past, one thing that I would recommend if they want to get a loan in the future is to, you know, look around and see if there is a credit card, a very simple, maybe a small credit card that you can get. Some banks will offer credit cards for, you know, different situations. And it's a start, right? You get your first credit card. I'm not saying go crazy on that, but, you know, put $100 a month on it, pay it off. You do that for several months, you start building a good credit file, which you can then, you know, grow over time. So I don't know of any credit cards off the top of my head that do that, but, you know, I think talk to some of you know, folks in your community, talk to some banks, and see what they can offer.
Robin, from experience, so prior to me getting DACA, I am actually a DACA recipient, which prior to technically I was considered, you know, immigrant. Well, I am an immigrant, but I was considered illegal per se. Prior to that, one of the workarounds that we figured through like counselors in school and whatnot was a secure card, which you're able to get through banks, which basically you deposit a certain amount of money, and that money basically you use almost like a pool of money that you use and you repay, you use and you repay. And you do that for about a year or however, whatever your time frame is. And then after that, that would give you kind of like, I guess, some kind of credit that would then allow you to apply to a credit card, a very small credit card that then you could keep on building. And that was kind of the workaround that we found for my specific case, which I'm sure, Gabriela, that would be a great option for personal credit.
Yeah, is that DACA has options that legal.
No, but that was prior to DACA. That secure card you could get through banks with, I believe it's either just an ITIN number or something that you could just apply through. But yeah, that was prior to DACA. Once after DACA, you know, once I had my social, then everything became a lot easier. But secure cards are a great option to start.
One other option is to go with the CDFI, you know, the Community Development Financial Institution. You know, they're not regulated by the federal, you know, banking system, so they can make money to, they can loan money to anybody. You don't need a social security number. And now, I'm not saying every CDFI will do this. When I ran the loan fund, you know, we didn't require a social security number, and so we were able to offer loans to individuals or businesses without social security or ITIN numbers. So definitely talk to them. Some of them, like MISO, sorry, I'm about to sneeze. Okay. Some of them, like MISO, they also offer a credit builder loan. And so what they will do is they will set up a small loan for you, right? And they'll give you'll it's a loan, and the loan, you're borrowing money, and you borrow $5,000 or $1,000. I don't know the exact amount, but relatively small amount, $1,000. And you put that money in a bank account, savings account, and you don't really spend it, but all you do is every month you make the loan payments, and if you make the loan payment, you take it out from the money that you borrow, and by making the loan payments, you're building that credit file, that credit history. You know, an organization like MISO may be able to, you have to check with them, they may be able to offer, you know, loans to individuals without, you know, social security numbers, and as that first step to start building that credit. So it definitely does make it challenging, but there are some programs that are out there that provide that first step or two. Okay. So in terms of what you need to secure a business loan, I bring this up because I often came across a lot of businesses that needed a loan, but they didn't have the prerequisites to get a loan, even from a community development financial institution. So here are the things that you need, that as a young business you can start preparing for today, so that if and when you do need a loan, you're ready. The first and foremost is that you need accurate financial statements. You need bookkeeping. To run a business, you don't need to do bookkeeping, right? I know so many businesses that just kind of use their bank statement as, you know, their financial. They cannot, like, do I have extra money at the end of the month in my bank? If so, it was a good month. If not, it was a bad month, right? And so many businesses run it that way, and that's fine, but to really understand how your business is operating, you know, you really need to have good financial statements as a business owner. And that's just my advice to you, whether you want capital or not. To really have a good understanding of your business, you need to generate financial statements, accurate financial statements. But more importantly, if you want money from a third party, someone outside, a bank, even, you know, sometimes maybe even friends and family, the moment outside money is involved, you definitely need financial statements, and they have to be good quality. They have to be accurate. So you may not need it today, and that's fine, but if you anticipate needing money in the future, make that investment. Either hire a bookkeeper, to do a professional bookkeeper to keep your books in order, or learn how to, you know, do bookkeeping so that you can do it yourself with accuracy. I can't stress how important having financial statements are if you're looking for a business loan, an affordable business loan. You don't need financial statements if you're going after a predatory loan. And that's why it's very appealing to some business owners, because they don't need to do that, but you're going to be paying a very high price for that capital. You also need a credit score, personal credit score of 650 or more. The higher, the better. And that's because, you know, as a business owner, you're making financial decisions on behalf of the business. And banks will say, you know, there's a high correlation between how you manage your personal finances with how you manage your business finances. So if you're managing your personal finances reliably and therefore have a high credit score, chances are you're going to carry over those same behaviors and tactics for your business. You also need to have a plan to deploy the money and repay the money. You know, don't just say, "Oh, I think I need $50,000 and yeah, I'll figure out how to repay the loan." You know, I've known businesses who have done that and it's worked out for them, but it's very risky. If you borrow $50,000 or $5,000, however much you need for your business, and can't say for sure that you can meet those monthly payments, you're putting yourself at a huge risk if you can't, you know, repay that loan. So do a little bit of forecasting and planning to make sure the amount of money that you're asking for and the ability to repay is reasonable. You need also profits. Profits are what repay a loan. And a bank, if you don't have profits, that's going to be one of the first things they look at. And if you don't have profits, they're not going to make a loan to you. The nonprofit lenders, the CDFIs, these community lenders, because they're willing to take a little bit more risk, you know, if you're not making a profit, but you're on a trend towards making profits, they may be a little bit more flexible and be able to extend to a loan, even though you might not be, you know, very profitable. And the last thing, most banks will want to see at least 2 years in business, which is tough for a startup business, because you're a startup by definition, you haven't been in business for 2 years. And so they want, you know, you to be in business for 2 years. So I tell this to the business owners because, you know, factor that into your plans. You know, don't expect to have a huge business, you know, be able to secure a huge business loan 6 months into your business. You know, make your plan so that when you do ask for that bigger business loan, give yourself at least 2 years and ideally 2 years of profits before you apply for the loan. So those are the common things that, you know, I think are essential for any kind of business loan. So what if you don't qualify for, you know, those criteria? One is, you know, as I said, approach a, you know, community lender, the nonprofit, the CDFI. They're willing to be more flexible and can accommodate some of those scenarios where there's a poor credit score. When I ran the CDFI, you know, a business that was on a good trajectory after 6 months, we were willing to consider. You can always reduce the loan amount. If you're borrowing too much and you can't make the monthly loan payments, you know, come up with a plan B and borrow less so your repayment plans or needs are less. Another thing, and this is very typical for startups, is take out a personal loan. So a business loan is a loan that the business takes out. The business is ultimately responsible for paying. But as a business owner, you can take a personal loan. That loan is in your name. You're personally responsible for repaying a loan. You take out a personal loan and then take that money and then invest it into your business. Most small business loans, or I say most loans that involve small businesses happen this way, at least initially. They take out a personal loan if they need to take out a loan. They take out a personal loan, take that money, and then invest it into the business. Now, ideally, the business then generates profits from it. The profits are passed back to the owner, and then the owner makes payments. But keep in mind that regardless of whether the business makes a profit or not, the owner is responsible. The person who took out the loan is still responsible for making the loan payments. So you need to have a high degree of confidence that you can make those loan payments, you know, in whatever financial situation that you're in. And lastly is just develop plans that are less reliant on outside capital. Maybe there's a way you can, you know, generate some profits to kind of self-fund the growth. Maybe you can ask your customers to pay in advance more. I know that's not always easy, but there may be a scenario where you can get a customer to join a subscription plan, so that way you have X dollars coming in a month, and that money you can plan on to grow your business. So try to figure out ways where you're less reliant on outside capital. Well, let me pause there and see if there's any questions. I think I have one slide left, and I think we have 2 minutes, so I'll take any last quick questions.
If
Yeah.
you do have any questions, I would suggest asking them now, as we are kind of getting close to the deadline and we won't have those 10 minutes at the end. So please ask any questions that you may have for Robin right now.
Well, let me also just offer some additional resources. One of the things that I do offer through Prosper Portland is these kind of office hours, and these are sessions, no charge to businesses in Portland, and it's a 30-minute kind of phone call or video session. And you can sign up and you can ask me any questions that you may have. So it's a very informal way of getting some key answers about your business. There are also, I developed a bunch of business loan videos that are available. They're through YouTube, but they're all on a Prosper Portland channel. And if you go to my website, you'll see links to access both the videos as well as to sign up for a Q&A session. So I would highly encourage you to look through some of the business videos, business loan videos, and see if they may address some of your questions or concerns. And then I'm also available for these kind of quick kind of Q&A sessions. And then if you're a business that has launched and is in what we consider a growth stage, generating revenue and either generating profits or on pace to generate profits, one of the other things that I can offer is individualized support if you're contemplating or planning or want to secure a loan, and I can provide some support that way. So and that's something that you can request a referral through Hacienda CDC and your advisor, and they can put you in touch with me and kind of get on that path if that makes sense for your business. So those are some additional resources that you have outside of today's session. I think Mia has a question.
Hi. Yes. So this food business, Spaboity is new, but the business form is established in 2018 as S corporation, and it at that time ran as a different type of business under that INC. And now that I am starting with a new business, but it is already existing structure, it's umbrellaed. So question is, when I'm processing loan, is that any, what kind of conflict it could be causing? Because the actual business has not really started yet.
Yeah, I think, in that scenario, technically, right, you're an established business and you have kind of several years of experience. So, technically, you could qualify for a loan, and you can leverage some of the experience and the profits that you may have generated in the past, assuming you did generate some profits. But, in the loan application process, a lender, an underwriter is the person that will evaluate your financials and evaluate your loan application. They will generally ask questions about the past of the company, and they will probably determine pretty quickly how what they will determine. They can probably assess pretty quickly if this is a new revenue stream, of a or additional revenue stream, they'll probably be able to determine pretty quickly that, you know, this may be a new venture. And you know, every situation is different. You know, there could be businesses that, you know, started offering one product and then spins off another